About 14,200 years ago, in a river valley in what is now western Germany, a puppy got sick. We know it was about 28 weeks old, and we know it was very ill, because illness leaves marks in teeth. When researchers re-examined this animal in 2018, they found enamel that had failed to form, severe gum disease, and a strange pattern of wear along the jaw, consistent with an animal that caught canine distemper and survived it. Distemper kills puppies. A young dog that comes through it does not do so alone. It has to be kept warm, given water it cannot go and find, cleaned up after for weeks, through seizures and fever, by somebody getting absolutely nothing in return. This animal was too young and too sick to hunt, guard, herd, or work. Somebody did it anyway. We know because this dog was buried with 2 human beings. That is the oldest solid evidence of a thing you will probably do today. You'll see an animal, on a street, on a screen, at somebody's door, and your hand will start moving before you've decided anything. We can now say a great deal about why. There is a detector that fires on a specific shape. There is a nerve system tuned almost exactly to the speed of stroking an animal. And there is a reward mechanism far older than either. By the end of this, you'll know all 3. But the fastest way to see what those explanations can and can't do is to point them at one strange fact. Because for a lot of people, this urge is stronger toward a stranger's dog than a stranger's baby. Every explanation in this video gets tested against that. In 1943, the Austrian zoologist Konrad Lorenz named a trigger, the Kindchen schema, the baby schema. His claim was that we aren't responding to babies, we're responding to a shape. A head, large relative to the body, a high forehead, eyes large and set low in the face, round cheeks, small nose, small chin. Hit those specifications, get a reaction. Miss them, don't. That was an idea in 1943. It's since been tested. In 2009, a group took real photographs of infant faces and dialed the baby schema features up and down parametrically, like a slider. More schema, less schema, same baby. Then they scanned people and watched what tracked the slider. What tracked it was the nucleus accumbens, a core structure of the brain's reward system. 2 honest caveats. First, who they scanned. 15 women who had never given birth. Small and one sex. This is not our brains light up. It's 15 women once. Second, what the researchers made of it. Humans are cooperative breeders. We raise children with help from people who aren't the parents. If that's right, a response to infant features in someone who's never had an infant isn't a malfunction. It's the point. Now the obvious objection, a puppy is not a baby. Maybe we run one system for our own infants and a separate, sloppier one for animals. There's a clever test for that, and it points at one detector, not 2. Stare at anything long enough and your perception recalibrates. It's why cold water stops feeling cold. So researchers had people adapt to cute puppy faces, then asked them to judge the cuteness of human babies. The judgment shifted. The after effect crossed the species line, and you cannot fatigue a detector you weren't using. I'll flag one thing because it's the kind of thing this channel should flag. In 2024, 2 researchers audited the whole baby schema literature and argued that its cross-species reach has been assumed more often than demonstrated, and that this extreme sensitivity to the shape may turn out to be a specifically human trait. The after-effect result stands. The sweeping version of it is less settled than you'd guess from how often it's repeated. So the standard story is real and measurable. And it isn't only about babies. Which means it does not yet explain the asymmetry. If this is one shared detector tuned to a shape babies and puppies both have, why would it pull harder toward the puppy? Before the dog wins, we need to establish what's actually pulling the trigger. It isn't biology. its geometry. In 2011, a team photographed cars and manipulated them, enlarged the headlights, shrank the grille. Then, instead of asking how people felt, they measured it. Electrodes tracking the zygomaticus major, the muscle that pulls your mouth into a smile. The baby schema cars made it fire harder, and the effect appeared when people rated cuteness, not attractiveness. Different circuits, and only one of them responds to a car with big headlights. Which brings me to a robot seal. Paro is used in dementia care, and it's shaped like a baby harp seal for a reason its designer has explained. Earlier attempts built robot cats and dogs, and they failed. Not technically, socially. Everybody knows how a dog is supposed to behave, so the moment the robot gets it slightly wrong, the illusion dies. Almost nobody has met a seal. There's no expectation to violate. Paro works. How it works is the interesting part because somebody ran the right experiment. A randomized trial across 28 Australian care facilities. 415 residents living with dementia. 3 sessions a week for 10 weeks. 3 arms, and one most studies would never have included. Paro, usual care, and an identical Paro with the robotics switched off. Against the switched-off toy, the working robot won an engagement. People talked to it and looked at it more. On mood, it did not. On agitation, it did not. Which is the honest version of a story usually told as a triumph of robotics. Most of the benefit wasn't the robot. It was a soft, holdable baby-shaped thing being put in somebody's arms. And it doesn't only make you reach, it changes what your hands do. In 2012, students in Japan played Operation, the game with the tweezers and the tiny plastic bones, looked at pictures for 2 minutes, then played again. After baby animals, successful extractions rose about 44%, and people got deliberately slower. After adult animals, about 12, all of which supports an argument Lorenz might not have liked. In 2011, 2 psychologists proposed, hypothesis not finding, that cuteness isn't primarily a parenting trigger at all. It's a mind attribution trigger. Cute things get hypermentalized. You start treating them as having an inner life and opinions, which explains toys and cartoons and the voice you use on a car that won't start, and parental instinct doesn't. So, the trigger is a shape. It fires at objects with no biology in them. Nothing here cares what the thing is, which means the asymmetry can't be about species. Straight with you first. Nobody has run the study. There is no experiment measuring the urge to pet animals against the urge to hold human infants in the same people, and none isolating texture, fur versus bare skin, as a variable. What the literature has instead is a set of results that make the asymmetry unsurprising, and they're worth walking through because they close in on it from 3 directions. Start with the ranking. In 2011, people rated infant facial features across species. Puppies and kittens came out roughly as attractive as human infants and clearly ahead of adult dogs and cats. Then it sharpens. In 2015, another group put something at stake. Not rate this face, but choose, in a hypothetical adoption task and a task deciding who gets a toy. The preference for the cuter face held across human infants and puppies alike. And in the toy task, the preference for cute puppies was stronger than the preference for cute human infants. Which brings us to a feeling English has no word for. Filipino does. Jiggle. Roughly, the gritting of teeth and the urge to squeeze something unbearably cute. In 2015, a team at Yale measured it, and their questionnaire items are the best written items in psychology. Actual wording. If I am holding an extremely cute baby, I have the urge to squeeze his or her little fat legs. When I see something I think is so cute, I clench my hands into fists. I am the type of person that will tell a cute child, I could just eat you up. through gritted teeth. In their first survey of 105 people, inside an explicit boundary of not wanting to cause harm, 30% said they had actually pinched a cute baby or child, and 52% said they had squeezed one. Now the finding that reframes it. They tracked how positive mood moved over the 5 minutes after viewing the photographs. And the people reporting more of these squeeze and clench responses showed a steeper decline in positive feeling afterward. They came down faster. So the squeeze isn't the care system malfunctioning. It looks like a break. Being flooded and incapacitated by overwhelming positive emotion is not useful when there's an actual infant in front of you who needs something. If clenching helps you come down, it helps you function. And that logic makes a prediction somebody tested with electrodes. Caveat first, one study, 54 people, not replicated. They recorded brain activity while people viewed cuter and less cute animals and cuter and less cute babies. The cute aggression signature showed up for the animals. For the babies, nothing reached significance. Not in the brain measures, not in what people reported. And the author's explanation is the break logic exactly. It would not have been adaptive to be incapacitated by positive feelings toward a very cute baby who required caretaking. Treat that as a hint, not a result. But it points somewhere uncomfortable. The urge may be permitted to run hotter for animals precisely because animals don't need you. There's a bleaker version from 1997, and again, hypothesis. It compares pet keeping to brood parasitism. The cowbird that lays its egg in another bird's nest and lets that bird do the work. On this account, pets are functionally social parasites, manipulating responses that evolved for human relationships, hooking us with infant features, then holding us by letting us attribute a mind to them. If that's right, the asymmetry was never a paradox. The response was never about species at all. And then there's the explanation nobody bothers to study, which may be doing more work than all of it. You are socially permitted to touch a stranger's dog. You are socially forbidden to touch a stranger's baby. One of those urges gets to become a behavior. The other, you swallow on the pavement and never mention. So the target may not be the variable, which pushes the question onto the other end of the gesture. Your hand. In 1999, Swedish neurophysiologists doing something genuinely unpleasant, pushing fine electrodes into the nerves of awake volunteers to listen to single fibers, reported a second touch system. Slow, unmelanated fibers and hairy skin, responding to gentle stroking. Not pressure, not vibration, not what ordinary touch nerves care about. They had no obvious job. 10 years later, the job turned up, and it is uncannily specific. These fibers fire hardest when skin is stroked at between 1 and 10 centimeters per second. Precisely the band people rate most pleasant. Faster or slower, the firing falls off and the pleasure falls with it. Then a later study narrowed it further. The single best stimulus is 3 centimeters per second at 32 degrees Celsius. The temperature of skin. And note the direction because popular versions get this backwards. Hotter was worse. 1 to 10 centimeters per second at body warmth is petting an animal. Described in nerve fiber terms without anybody setting out to describe petting. There's a stranger piece of evidence too from a single patient known in the literature as GL, who lost her myelinated touch fibers to a nerve disorder. She cannot feel ordinary touch on her arm, stroke it with a soft brush, and she reports something faint, diffuse, and pleasant, with the signal appearing in insular cortex rather than the primary touch areas. One patient and later work shows these fibers influence both regions, so skip the tidy version. But it supports a real reframe. Affectionate touch may be less like vision and more like hunger. a report on the state of your body, not information about the world. Elegant. Now, let me break it. All of that is about hairy skin, and you pet with your palm. Your palm was long thought to have none of these fibers at all. A 2021 study found some roughly 7 times sparser than in hairy skin, about 1 fiber per 80 ordinary touch receptors. That is a long way from being the explanation. And it's messier still. A meta-analysis pooling 18 studies found no systematic preference for hairy skin over smooth skin at all. And blocking the fast myelinated fibers changes pleasantness ratings. So those are involved too. So the neat sentence you'll find everywhere. Petting feels good because your palm has nerves tuned to a caress. Does not survive contact with the literature. The receiving hardware is real. It just isn't mostly in the hand you're using. One thing the tuning does explain, and I'll label it my inference rather than a finding. The system peaks at skin temperature. Not cooler, not warmer. A living animal is one of very few things in your house that is exactly that warm, which raises the question these chapters have been circling. If the pleasure isn't explained by the nerves in your palm, where is the reward coming from? The reward for stroking something soft and warm comes from a much older behavior. And that behavior was never about hygiene. In 1991, Robin Dunbar compiled grooming data across 44 species of free living primates and asked what grooming time tracks. Not body size, not how dirty the animal is, not parasite load. It tracks group size. In some New World monkeys, grooming is nearly absent. In some baboons and macaques, it takes more than 10% of waking activity. 1/10 of your life spent on something that isn't cleaning. Grooming is social technology. We know roughly how it pays, and the answer is chemical. In a small study of monkeys in 1989, animals kept apart were allowed back together. And mostly, what they did was groom each other. Beta endorphin in their cerebrospinal fluid rose in all but one pair, by between 17 and 186%, depending on the animal. Then the researchers pushed it both ways. Block the opiate receptors and the monkeys work harder to be groomed. Give them morphine and they lose interest. That's a system paid in the brain's own opioids. In humans, imaging work has found that social touch measurably changes the opioid system. Phrased carefully on purpose because the popular version, brain scans prove stroking releases endorphins, overstates what those scans found. And here's what surprised me most. We call ourselves the naked ape, but follicle for follicle, human hair density is roughly comparable to a chimpanzee's. What changed wasn't the number of hairs. It was the hairs. Ours went fine and short and nearly invisible. The skin underneath is still hairy skin, machinery intact. A system built to be paid in fur, with no fur left to work on, which is where the other half arrives. Because there's only something to touch, thanks to a history far less settled than you've been told. Take dogs. You'll read a confident date. Don't trust it. 27 ancient dog genomes show at least 5 distinct dog lineages by 11,000 years ago, and a separate, more speculative genetic model pushes domestication back to around 23,000 years ago in Siberia. Not from a dated dog in the ground, but from divergence times. And then the foxes. You have almost certainly heard this one. A Soviet breeding program selected silver foxes for tameness alone and got floppy ears, curly tails, and white patches thrown in for free. The standard proof that domestication comes as a package deal. What's less often mentioned is what tameness was actually scored on, which is exactly this video's subject. Monthly, an experimenter would try to pet and handle the fox while offering it food, and the score recorded whether it approached. and whether it bit the hand that touched it. The calmest 10% bred on. Within decades, the researchers reported foxes actively seeking human contact. Here's the correction. In 2020, researchers traced the founder animals to fur farms on Prince Edward Island in eastern Canada. Foxes already bred in captivity for generations, already carrying some of the traits later credited to the experiment. Their conclusion quoted, "Both the conclusions of the farm fox experiment and the ubiquity of domestication syndrome have been overstated." And then, because this is how science works, that critique got a published rebuttal. It's a live fight, not a settled overturning. One question is left. Does any of this matter? The clearest answer came from an experiment that should not have been run. In the 1950s, Harry Harlow separated infant rhesus macaques from their mothers at birth and raised them with two artificial surrogates: a bare wire frame warmed by radiant heat and a frame covered in cloth. The design element that mattered. For 4 of the newborns, the wire mother provided milk, and the cloth mother provided nothing. And for the other 4, it was reversed. The infants clung to the cloth mother either way. They visited the wire one to feed, then went back. Harlow's conclusion was that contact comfort is a variable of overwhelming importance in developing affection, and feeding a variable of negligible importance. I won't move past that lightly. These experiments deliberately produced maternal deprivation, and Harlow's later work produced severe isolation. They are now a standard case study in research ethics and would not be approved today. The finding was real, and it was bought at a cost the animals had no way to consent to. Which brings us to the claim you've heard most often, that petting is good for you. The evidence is real, but not where people think. The hormonal story is the weak part. The most cited study on petting your own dog measured 10 women with their own Labradors, called itself exploratory in its own title, and found the dog's oxytocin rose while the owner's cortisol went up at 15 and 30 minutes, not down. A later study found no significant difference in owners' oxytocin, whether they interacted with their own dog, an unfamiliar dog, or a fake one. And much of this literature measures oxytocin in blood, urine, or saliva and treats it as a readout of the brain, which 2 prominent physiologists have argued is questionable at best, using assay methods they call discredited. The cardiovascular evidence is better and older. In 1988, 60 undergraduates had their blood pressure tracked while they did 3 things: pet a dog, talk to the dog, and talk to the human experimenter. Blood pressure was lowest while petting, higher while talking to the dog, highest while talking to the researcher. The authors concluded the touch was doing most of the work, which is, in a sense, the only claim this whole video has made. So where does that leave the thing your hand does without asking you? 3 of the 4 answers came in: a detector that fires on a shape and anything from a puppy to a car, a slow touch system tuned to the speed and warmth of stroking a living animal, which turns out to be mostly absent from the hand you stroke with, so even that explanation is incomplete, and a reward running on machinery built for grooming each other. The 4th one didn't. Nobody knows why it pulls harder toward a stranger's dog than a stranger's child. One small study hints the flood is allowed to run hotter for something that doesn't need us. There's an uncomfortable hypothesis that we're being quietly farmed by a shape. There's the mundane possibility that one urge is socially permitted and the other isn't. Nobody has measured it properly, which, if you want a thing to be curious about after this ends, is a better one than most, which is roughly where that puppy in the ground leaves us. Somebody in a cold valley, 14,200 years ago, spent weeks keeping alive an animal that could not repay them, and was buried beside it. Whatever they were acting on, we haven't finished explaining it yet.